Well, good afternoon. Thanks for coming to our panel, the Pittsburgh independent comic scene. My name is Dan Greenwald. I'm the co-founder and co-host of the Comic Book Pit. It's a comic book-based podcast we record locally here in Pittsburgh. We've been recording since 2008. Just to give you a little bit of background, myself and the guy at the end there, Scott Hedlund, we started recording Comic Book Pit, like I said, back in 2008. We added our third co-host, Jared Catherine, who's sitting right here, this in 2012. And then this summer, our friend and recurring guest, Sean Atkins, joined the CBP family. He's sitting right there as our fourth host.
He's more like an intern.
Yeah, intern Sean. But we're excited to be here today to talk about the independent comics community here in Pittsburgh, which is, let's face it, one of the best cities on the face of the earth, right? I think we can all agree on that. But I think this is a special town, and some of the best people you'll meet, either in or out of comics, hail from this area. And I'm going to introduce you to some of them right now. At the very end, like I said, that's Scott Hedlund. Scott creates comic books in his home near Imperial, Pennsylvania. Over the past 15 years, Scott has contributed pencils, inks, colors, covers, and letters to books and webcomics, including Weirdlings, Fairhaven, Chaos Punks, WZWA, World of Orenda, Super Haters, Pack of Lies, and In No Way Memorable. Sitting next to him is Jim Rugg. Jim makes comics, books, drawings, illustrations, and designs. His books and comics include Street Angel, Aphrodisiac, The Plain Janes, Rambo 3.5, notebook drawings, and Super Mag. He's exhibited drawings at I Am 8-Bit, Gallery 1988, Mondo, and the Society of Illustrators. Honors include an Ignatz Award, the Pittsburgh Foundation's Investing in Professional Artist Grant, and AIGA's 50 books, 50 covers selection for the best designed books, and you can find him at jimrugg.com. Next to Jim is Wayne Wise. Wayne is a freelance writer and artist, and he's the co-creator of the Xeric Award-winning comic Grey Legacy. He has 4 novels under his belt. He serves as the resident comics scholar for Pittsburgh's Toonseum down on Liberty Avenue. He also teaches comics and popular culture at Chatham University, and he works at Phantom of the Attic Comics in Oakland. And then sitting next to me, the man, the myth, the legend, M.L.Walker. He's a visual artist, writer, photographer. His freelance projects include Hood's Pal, Superheroes of the Holocaust, and Comictanium, the super materials of the superheroes. In his independent comic Hero Corp International, he has recast himself, his friends, and associates in a world of corporate American superheroes. So, that is the panel for the next 45 minutes. And so I'm just going to ask you guys some questions, and you can, if we want to go down the line for the first series of questions, and then free form it after that. However, anyone can just jump in. But Marcel, I'll ask you first. When were you first aware that Pittsburgh had a comic scene, or what was your first exposure to it?
Gosh. I have people tell me that they just considered me to always been a part of the scene. I mean, I personally know that I've always wanted to make comics, so I've been making them since I was little. But when was I first cognizant of our scene? The last 20 years or so. Gosh, and it's a little hard to answer just because things are so much different right now. There's so much more interconnected. Like, it's just more visible. It's more present. And well, yeah, because I'm old, so a lot of this predates the internet. Like, before the internet, I mean, it was just who you met and who you knew and who you networked with that way. So yeah, I don't know. Like, eventually, growing up and going to school here, I didn't really have any friends or anybody I knew who wanted to make comics. I knew people who bought them and who read them, or liked the pictures, but I didn't really know anybody who wanted to make them. So that's why I started just making them myself. That's why I started just doing all the things and writing and drawing and learning how to print and all that. It was probably really when I first started going to comic conventions, and was it you? Somebody just told me like the first Pittsburgh Comic Con was in '93, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, there were conventions before that, but the one called the Pittsburgh Comic Con, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess that would have been where I first figured out, well, I first saw other people doing what I do. So it started planting the seeds for me of just having a network, having, you know, a community. So for me, that's when it started.
Great, thank you. Wayne?
Yeah, I guess I'm older than Marcel. First comics convention I ever came to was at Duquesne University in 1981, and met other people then. There was an organized group called the Pittsburgh Comics Club at that time, which was one of the first organized comics clubs in the country. So Pittsburgh's always had a really pretty vibrant fan scene here. I didn't live in the city then, but I mean, I met people then who were doing stuff, but you know, pre-internet, no email, I didn't keep in contact with them. Always wanted to do comics. Late 80s, there was this big underground thing, mini comics. You would go down to Kinko's, you would draw and write stuff, and you go down to Kinko's and you would make your own comics and sell them through the mail. And if you could find people through magazines and fanzines and that sort of thing. But in the early 90s, I could count on one hand and maybe half the other the people I knew who were doing it. Myself and my friend Fred, who I collaborated with, our friends Gordon and David, Wayno and Don Simpson. Ron Friends, who's downstairs. Ron Friends has worked for Marvel and DC and everybody else for 30-some years, 35 years. I mean, I knew Ron through the convention circuit, and he was working as a professional. But that's different than the small press scene. I'd have killed for the scene we have now in 1992 when we were doing the mini comics, because we were on an island by ourselves writing and drawing comics and hoping someone out there would read a blurb in one of the fanzines and order something, you know, send us $1.25 for postage. But yeah, going to the conventions, that's where I met all of you initially, is the conventions or the store, and just how it has grown. And you know, I've worked with Scott on projects, and I've worked with Marcel on projects, and I'd forgotten, I inked that story of Barry Links down there. He has a copy of that. So I've worked with all these different people doing stuff. But seeing how that has grown, working at Phantom of the Attic, where people bring in, I mean, we've always tried to be real supportive of the local scene. If you're making comics, bring them in. We'll put them out on consignment, try to help you find an audience and sell stuff. And I think a lot of the stores around here have been real good about that sort of thing. We were selling your self-published mini comics before you were rich and famous.
Mm-hmm. So right now you have someone to sell?
We have some right now, yeah.
I moved here in 2000, and with the intent of making comics. I graduated college, and I knew one other person that was somewhat local that wanted to make comics. So we would meet every week, and we lived on opposite sides of town. So we would meet in Oakland. It was kind of a center point at the comic book store, and then we would go, after we looked at comics, we would go and get coffee and look at comics that we were working on, sort of as an incentive to make us work. Like, you didn't want to show up and not have something new or something good. Although looking back, we didn't have anything good for many years. But that group started to expand a little bit. We started to meet other cartoonists. I was aware of a few of them from comic book shows. I was aware of them from finding small press comics in stores, and then, you know, seeing like a mailing address that was local and thinking like, okay, this person's here. Who is this guy?
Yeah.
Do I know this person? How do I meet them? Because I'm a big advocate for community. I think it makes, making art can be hard, and having other people that are sharing that experience can be very useful. So, I don't know, probably 2001 or so, I had a group at that point that I was able to show work and get feedback and encouragement and inspiration from the work they were producing. So, early 2000s.
For me, I think like recognizing a comic scene probably came more with the podcast, but originally I just approached some people at the show. It was probably Pittsburgh Comic Con in 1996, and that turned out to be turned into great friendships. It was my friend Brian Babiock and Barry Link, and Brian and I collaborated on numerous projects, and that's when we actually had Wayne join us on a couple inking projects for that too, which was incredible, like an incredible couple of years of working together. So, but that didn't reach out to the community. That was more of us just doing it because we like to do comics. But I think,
And you can purchase those on Scott's table downstairs.
but I think when Dan and I started the podcast, we just did that for fun too. We just wanted to do something to, like, hey, we get together every week and we talk about comics. Let's do this. And but then all of a sudden, people knew us, and then people would reach out to us and say, "I also draw comic books," you know. And then that's what happened, is that community started growing out of that, because it, like, just the interconnections. Like, we shopped at Phantom of the Attic where Wayne works, and the daytime people then knew who we were, and I never had been there in the daytime. So then it was like I met all these people through that. So, and then I find out that they're into comic books, and then it just from there it just has snowballed, and you know, I mean, it's like what you see here today.
Yeah.
And
I think the store, I mean, our store certainly, and I think conventions, it's the place where these things come together and people meet each other, and you meet like-minded people, and when you
where-
find someone else is doing it.
It's where everyone knows your name.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it really is.
Cheers for comics.
So,
And actually, one thing I wanted to add as an addendum, because Wayne made me think of this. The question being, you know, when did I become aware of the community here? Before I guess I could even say I became aware of a community, you know, I became aware of other artists, and you know, Ron Friends, who we mentioned earlier, Ron Friends, Pat Olive, and actually the first one for me would have been Don Simpson, who's downstairs. Like these were the first three professionals who I knew, who lived and worked in this area, and who were actually kind enough to take time and allow me to come into their studios and see them work. Because prior to that, I'd read about this. I had heard, you know, again, before the internet, like I knew what I'd dug up. But this is the first time I actually got to see people work. And I've always said, the time I sat down with Don Simpson, I was like 18, I think, and he invited me over to his studio, and I just, in the space of, I don't know, 2 hours or so, I learned more in 2 hours than I had in the 18 years prior to that. Just everything. I watched him ink with his brush and learned how to, oh, that's what you do with that thing. And just looking at the books he had on his shelves. You know, my taste had always been predominantly mainstream. I had aimed for a career making mainstream comics. And he just had stuff I'd never seen. And it still took me years to kind of adapt to that. But that's when I became a little bit more cognizant that, oh, there are people who do this here. I can't say I made that leap to knowing we had a community, per se. But I did become aware that, oh, okay, so this is a thing. And I can do this here in Pittsburgh. And there are other people doing this in Pittsburgh, people whose work I'm familiar with. You know, the first comic that I remember getting that Ron Friends drew, I was like 13. It's an issue of What If. I just passed a collection of it downstairs. I may buy it and make him autograph it, because I can't leave Ron alone 20-some years later, so I don't know.
he'll give you shit for that.
Of course he will.
Well, Marcel, it's funny you mention that, because, and I'll maybe lead in with the last thing you just said. Because my next question is, if you can remember the first local comic you might have read or purchased, or the first thing you kind of remember as being like, oh wow, this isn't Marvel or DC, this is something I bought in my hometown.
Probably one of Barry Link's comics, quite honestly. That's funny, because if you go downstairs and go downstairs and find Barry, and don't tell him that this is where you heard it. Barry's kind of like the Poobah in my mind of our he's been doing this forever, and he just knocks so much work out.
25 years.
Yeah, like, and he has literally hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of art that he's done for his characters, and just keeps knocking it out. And he was self-publishing in the 90s, and he puts it online now, and just tireless. Yeah, I mean, Ron Friends is the first person I knew. I met Ron before he got his first professional assignment at that first convention I went to. But his work stood out to me then, just the level at which he was working at that first con. Just, you know, I saw his portfolio and was really amazed by it. And within the next year, I started seeing his name. Like, his first job was Kazar at Marvel. Then he started doing Star Wars books.
that's when I first saw him too.
And he's the guy, first appearance of the black costume on Spider-Man, an Amazing Spider-Man. He's the guy who did that. And
the Superman too.
yeah, he did Superman
some of that
in the
too.
90s. Yeah, he's like an incredibly long run on Thor. Ron's drawn everything.
I thought that was cool, just because that Star Wars was what led me into comics in the first place. So when I bought it, he was my first favorite artist. And then years later, I moved to Pittsburgh and found out he lived here. So I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
You know, someone I looked up to just lives right there. You know.
Our Zurich grant, for those of you who don't know, the Zurich grant that he mentioned that I won, Peter Laird, who's one of the co-creators of the Ninja Turtles, and a multi-gazillionaire, for 20 years gave out grant money to self-publishers. This was in the days before the internet. This is in the days before crowdsourcing and that sort of thing. And my friend Fred and I, who were doing mini comics, applied for it and won first ones. And Peter Laird paid for the publication of this book in 1993. We were going to conventions then, and like we were one of the only local self-publishers. Don Simpson, that first book I bought by someone in Pittsburgh who was self-publishing, the Don Simpson Megaton Man.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a good
Yeah.
one. That's a good one.
And like us and Don would be at a convention with our books, and at that time, nobody was doing. There wasn't that same kind of scene here.
Yeah.
So thank you, Peter Laird.
Just to be funny, it wasn't my first book to buy, but I would say Jim's, what was it? Oh my God, I forgot the name already.
Outfitters.
Outfitters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, The Outfitters was one of his original books. And, that was one of those things, too, because it was completely different than a Marvel or DC comic. So, I mean, it was one of those things, too, like, what is this, But I remember it well. So, and, well, no, just for Jim, what I always liked, too, was he would experiment a lot with his art styles in the books. And I think that was what was cool about him. So, because he put out a couple issues of it, but then they would be completely different from issue to issue. And so that was neat because that, was just that idea of it can be different every issue, something break ground kind of thing. So
That was a big attraction for me too, indie comics.
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody, I think pre-internet, everybody that got into comics read Marvel and DC because, at least for me, that was what was available. I didn't have a comic book shop in my town, so I just had like a spinner rack at the newsstand. And then once I found indie comics, it was kind of like, oh man, you can draw like anything, Because I mean, like I would see drawings outside of comics that were this, the history of art, right? Like everything you can imagine. But in comics, especially Marvel, DC, they had what were known as house styles, so everything kind of was pared down and made sense next to each other, if it was a crossover or on the same rack. And then once I found indie comics and realized you could just do whatever you wanted, it was just game on.
yeah.
Okay. Well, and some of you already mentioned your first work. So part of the next question was, what do you consider, for those of you who didn't already mention it, what do you consider your first published work or your first mass printed work, and where and how did you distribute it, and how was that received when you first kind of broke ground on that?
Does it matter what order we go in?
No, whoever wants to.
I don't know if I've even had anything done there yet. See, I've done a lot of freelance work, and that's actually what I started doing first, like comics related, but not strictly comic book work that was mass produced. But
Now, I remember, and I don't know where this falls in your history, but I remember one of the first indie books I bought was the Smoking Guns.
oh my gosh, yes,
I have somewhere in my milk crate of indie books that I have collected over the past 15 years. I have a Smoking Gun somewhere signed by you.
So from Smoking Guns was I had worked on this thing for years, and then I was teaching classes out at Pittsburgh Center for the Arts. I was doing that for years, and I realized I need to actually put this together. I need to have this physically out there as a comic book, a book. So long story short, I actually arranged to take a sabbatical from my job informally, but my boss was really good at the time, and he knew what I was doing, so I just took a couple months off from work. I planned for a year to do this, and I self-published a comic, so yeah, I guess that's my first one, because I did the whole thing, I did the research, I checked into Diamond, so it went through Diamond distributors, so it was in comic shops. I know it even got out to England, a few copies. It wasn't many, but it was a few. I did everything on that book. I wrote and drew and penciled and inked. And it's funny you would say that because I've over the years had a number of people say, Mikey Wood, who's another artist writer downstairs, he tells me like he remembers getting that. I guess that was sort of formative for him in seeing, oh, I can do this. I can make my own book. I haven't done anything with Smoking Guns in quite some time. Actually, the sequel to that book is half done and has been half done forever because then I just moved on to other things. And those characters are really giving me a hard time. But that was my first. Yeah, that was 97. So, yeah, that's when I did mine.
Yeah. Okay. I talked about the Gray Legacy thing. We'd been doing this, I say, going to Kinko's and making copies and selling it through the mail before that. I have all kinds of other pre-stories, but we've only got so much time here. So we can skip some of that. I did some professional inking in the 90s with Malibu Graphics, who was probably at that point like a Dark Horse IDW level publisher.
Okay.
My first was Street Angel, and it came out of, I was making mini comics, as Scott said, a lot of different styles and different stories, and I did one called Street Angel about this homeless skateboarding kung fu master who lived in a really tough city that was overrun with ninja gangs and stuff, and the response was good, and I liked drawing it, and in the process we had written more than one issue's worth of material, so because the response was good and we liked it, I sent it to a publisher called SLG. I don't know if they even still publish.
I don't think so.
But they were a small indie publisher in the 80s and 90s, and they agreed to publish it, so that was my first published work, and they did 5 issues of it and then did a collection of it probably around 2005.
That's awesome. These guys are, they have more credentials than I do, but I think for me, it was kind of I was working on 2 different projects. One I had just worked on for years was called Fairhaven, and it was a start and stop project. It was one of those ones where I kind of really learned, everything as far as drawing a comic book. But then we kind of shelved it and we started on another book called World of Verenda, and we did it weekly for a year, and we just did, let's just do 1 page every week, and by the end of the year we'll have this big book. And that was actually my first published work that I took to comic shows, and then like a year or 2 later I actually finished Fairhaven. So I mean, there was a happy ending to that story, but yeah, I'd say World of Verenda was my first complete story that I took to shows and had that as a completed work. So.
And just to kind of piggyback on that, how do you, looking at that first work, how do you view it now as obviously not to compare it to your current work, but how do you view it as an experience or the process? How have things changed for you as far as the process, or again, how do you just view that work in general? And anyone can just jump in if they have an answer for that.
Oh boy, they're all looking at me.
I'm still very proud of the Zurich Grant thing I did 20 years ago. I have no problem showing it to people and sharing it. There's stuff that Fred and I did in 1986 that was a precursor to this that I would have to kill anyone if they saw it.
This is actually a reprint of the original Street Angel stuff that I did, not the mini comic, but the series. And I'm pretty critical of everything, especially my own work. So whenever I finish something, and once it's sent to the printer, I try not to look at it, because once it's sent to the printer, you can't do anything about it except fret. So the book went out of print shortly after it was published. The reception was pretty good, and it went out of print. And then recently, another publisher I was working with asked me about reprinting it, and I went back through after not looking at it for many years, and was happy enough with it that I thought, sure, it should be in. If he thinks it should be in print, I agree with that. I'm more or less happy with it. But I had done, like Wayne says, years worth of comics before that. Those are going to stay out of print if it's up to me.
I'm proud of what I did. It was good stuff. I also take into account how old I was, my level of experience, all that fun stuff, and I'm more accomplished now. And now, to be fair, you go back with everything you did. You know, I'll look at something I did last week and go, oh, how was that? Every now and again, though, you do that thing that really holds up, and you can look at it and you go, I did that really well. Like, that one was a good one. If I can, you want to try and maintain the level of the best of your work. I think that's the goal. That's my goal. But, you know, smoking guns anyway, you know, the book, the artwork, I'm a much better artist now because I've drawn a lot more. But in terms of like what I took on at that time, because I was 23, 24, and I didn't really have, there wasn't this, you know, I couldn't just go online, or I didn't really even know who to ask questions, but I really wanted to make that thing happen. So I look at that book, I'm more proud of what I chose to do and that I did it. And at the time, a number of people said that they were proud of me. So, you know, that also feeds into it. You know, I did something, I accomplished a thing, and other people are proud of me, and I want to keep that going. So, you know, it all feeds into it.
I'm going to piggyback on that just to talk about, and to move on to another topic. I mean, if people are doing it now, I mean, if any of you are in the audience who are wanting to do this or get involved, I mean, in so many ways, it's so much easier now than it ever was. I mean, with this stuff, I mean, we were the publishers. This was printed someplace in North Dakota. You know, we had to find printers. We had to, you know, figure out how to deal with distributors. We had to do all that stuff. And now you can, you know, do your stuff and go online and find a place that will publish print-on-demand copies, and you can get 1 copy or 1,000 copies or whatever. There are all kinds of ways to do that. And if you're, you know, if you're wanting to get the work out there, post it on Tumblr. You know, Hark of Vagrant has become a New York Times bestseller, and she started out just posting it online. But I think just in terms of the scene, the local scene, the community thing we were talking about, there's a lot going on. If you're in the city, go to the comic shops, because most of them are going to be pretty supportive of at least putting your stuff out. I mean, that's where you can meet other people who are doing it. We have the Pittsburgh Zine Fair, which has, 40 people set up a couple times a year selling their self-published work. In the spring, we have PIX, which is the Pittsburgh Indie Expo. And same thing, it's just a really pretty big convention of self-published local people. And we have people traveling in from out of town. Right now, the Pittsburgh Museum, which is a block away from here on Liberty Avenue, has an exhibit called Drawn in Pittsburgh that has work from, 40 artists? You have the list there. A lot of local artists on display on their walls. So if you just want to see an incredibly wide variety, I'm hyping it. I helped curate the show, but I was pleased to do so because, you know, I've been doing this forever. I know so many people who do this, and I was introduced to artists and their work who I'd never heard tell of before by doing this show. And the breadth of stuff that we have from incredibly, you know, long-term professionals, people who've been doing this for a really long time. Some of Jim's stuff is there. Scott, you know, Marcel, they all have pages on the wall. As well as some people who are just brand new and just starting to do this. And I think it's a really good example of you can start at any level. You know, you just the main thing with, you know, if you want to do comics, make comics. You know, you don't have to be the best artist in the world. You don't have to be, you know, just make comics. Make comics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's my pitch.
Okay, settle down.
I saw a soapbox
Yeah.
earlier. Yeah.
But how do I make comics, Wayne? How? How? Where's the kit?
No. I'm sorry. Let me amend that. Marcel, stop making comics.
Well, done and done.
All right. So we have a couple more questions, and we'll open it up if anyone has any questions for the panel. And again, anyone can just jump in. So how do you feel independent comics are received, specifically in Pittsburgh now, as compared to when you first started? Or, you know, is there any difference, or go ahead.
I think they're fine. I don't think anybody makes the distinction of independent comics. That's us. That's people that were thinking about comics in the 90s. Like, it's just not a distinction. Comics are comics, and I think they're accepted everywhere. They're taught in schools locally. The Carnegie Library System stocks a great selection of comics, from manga to, I'm going to say adult comics, but they're not adult in the sense of X-rated. They're adult in the sense of like Fantagraphics and more sophisticated literary
Content,
comics.
yeah.
All the way to children's and all ages comics. Whenever I started doing comics, the local alt newspaper, the city paper here, did stories on Street Angel. This would have been 10 years ago. So did the Post-Gazette. So it's a very welcoming town from my experience, and it has been as long as I've been making comics. and I think those roots go all the way back to Andy Warhol. So,
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but I don't think independent is a term that applies in a meaningful way to almost anyone, as far as readers' interest in what they're reading.
All right.
I will mention one thing that has changed that I've noticed, and it's a topical change, but it's worth mentioning, is independent comics look different than they used to. For what that means, like, you know, if you were doing things yourself before, you were working with your own resources, and so, you know, the physical product was going to reflect what you were able to put into it. Now there's just so many resources, like, you know, what Wayne was saying about if you want to make comics, go make comics, because, you know, everything's there, everything, like, and just in terms of print quality, it's amazing what you can do. You know, I've seen some independent things that far surpass, you know, professional stuff, but, you know, so I think in terms of reception with that, it's kind of indistinguishable. So yeah, I guess that goes in line with what Jim was saying. It's all the same. It's, yeah, it's good. It's better.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone?
I was just thinking how one of the different things, like when I started out around the 90s, the big thing for an indie guy was to call it an ash can comic. And it basically was taking an 8.5 by 11 and folded in half, and you printed that on a copier. And I think that's like kind of a lost thing nowadays, because now I can just go online and upload my pages and somebody sends me the printed book.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, I think in that sense it's changed for us in the way we make them. But now we, you know, they I think nowadays they look professional, you know, but it's just
Do you think there's something to that, to not making as many comics anymore? Should there be like a process, like, I mean, not that you should make mini comics, but do you kind of miss that, or is there something about that?
Jim still does.
I still do that. I was going to say, over Monday, I'm planning
Are you
to
really?
Make a batch.
See, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I think that it's, what's nice is you have a choice now.
Yeah.
If you're into
Yeah.
making things, like I make, as we said in the beginning, I make books and zines and things, like some are very handmade, where I'm individually printing each page, because I like that process. You know, there's a tradition in printmaking, zine making that I find enjoyable. But if you're not interested in that, like Scott said, you don't need to engage with that at all.
Right.
You really can. Like, there are all of these services now that are easily available online, where you just upload your file and the comic book arrives at your house, done
Pretty
and looking
much.
professional.
Right.
So, I don't know. It's the best of all worlds.
Yeah,
for me.
Yeah, find what you want to do.
Yeah, it is a matter of how much you want to take on individually too. Then.
And you can upload them directly to digital distributors, Amazon, Comixology. You don't ever have to touch a physical book if you don't want to.
Or even like Image Comics, like you can, you know, basically have a writer-artist team and have a completed 5-issue series, and you send it to them, and if they say yes, they'll print it and distribute it for you. So you're essentially not making a comic, but now you have this mass, you know, distribution that you're like, wow, it just seems easier nowadays, depending on what road you want to take.
I want to let this little group, and by the way, thank you for coming out to listen to us. Thank you, seriously. This is the first time I've been on a comic book panel. This is great. I want to do this every week. But I want to give, so as a reward, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I just can't believe I forgot to say it. So, and you'll attest to this because you'll appreciate this one. So, you know, going back to the history of our local comic scene, at least during my little lifetime, a lot of us started working at, and I never tell people where I used to work, not because I'm embarrassed, it's just none of anybody's business and I don't want to give them free publicity, but a lot of us used to work at Kinko's. A lot of us. And Kinko's across Pittsburgh was a ridiculous little thing because we were all, it was huge and we were all in everybody's business, but there was a lot of us who were into comics. And we would just, you could,
Free printing.
well, not free. We paid for it in ways. But you know, we just got used to being able to make your comic. Like you go home, you draw, you do your thing, and then you go to work, and you could physically make your own comics. So, you know, when other people would bring their work in to be printed and to have comics made, you know, every now and again you'd let them know, I make comics, I got you covered, I know what you want. Yeah, I no longer work in print services, so I no longer physically make my own comics. And can I tell you, that was the one biggest thing for me not working in that field anymore, not being able to tangibly make my own comics. I have to give that off to somebody else to do. I kind of don't like that. I'm a control freak. But you all know something that I don't tell most folks. So.
Okay, and last question, then we'll open up for anyone that might have a question or comment. It's kind of broad, so what makes you hopeful or optimistic for the future of comics? It could be in Pittsburgh, it can be in general, it can be...
Jim Rugg, Scott Hedlund, and Wayne Mott.
The number of people I see doing it. Like I say, these things I mentioned, PIX and Pittsburgh Zine Fair, and nationally places like SPX and still in Bethesda and Ape in San Francisco. I mean, what Image is doing, like you say, anybody can put together a project and send to them. So
Right.
Things that would have been indie comics
Right.
30 years ago are now these giant successful books. The number of people doing it, I'm stunned. You walk through Artist Alley at any convention, and the number of people doing it is just outrageous.
Yeah.
They say in 1992, I knew 5 of us.
It's really encouraging.
Yeah.
Jeez. Oh, for hope for the future?
Yeah, do you have any hope for the future?
Yes, the children. No, but honestly, there's, just coming to these shows and for how long, and demographics wise, it was basically us guys, and
Yeah.
everybody looked like us, the 5 of us. And now there's like a whole variety of
You were
people, and it's
first.
like all ages, and it's exciting because a lot of people would think that, like at a show, like I grew out of this, I grew out of, it seemed like at a time, maybe there was a time where some people said I'm too old for comics, but now it seems like comics reach every age, and everybody's included in it, which is pretty sweet. So I think that, then anybody that wants to create a comic, they shouldn't feel like they can't be a part of it. So.
Yeah. Well said. Okay.
I'm also,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I just know
No.
if Jim had anything.
Nope.
Or...
Where comics are today far exceeds any hope or dream I've had for where comics could be. Like when I was a kid, the dream was comics would be accepted, because like my art teachers in school thought of comics as trash. My parents didn't want me to read comics. And so now it's like I've gotten grants from the local arts institutions. Like I said, they're in libraries. I teach comics at the School of Visual Arts. Like you can get comics from Japan, from Europe, from throughout history. Like, it's the greatest time ever to be a comics fan, and like I said, it far exceeds whatever I was hoping for. And all the people I know that advocated on behalf of comics, there's a local guy, Bill Boychelle, who runs Copacetic Comics, who's been an advocate for comics as a legitimate art form, for decades. I interviewed Gary Groth, who is the publisher of Fantagraphics and started the Comics Journal, which argued on behalf of comics as being a medium worthy of consideration along with any other art form. And they both said the same thing, like where comics are today, the opportunities that are available, the material that's available, and the work that's actually being created far exceeds whatever anybody was dreaming of. So I don't know I guess I hope that it stays this way.
This continues,
that's
yeah.
a-
But I
That's a
mean,
great answer.
the hope is that everybody seems into it. Like I think there are more people reading and enjoying comics now than ever, at least in my lifetime. So that's my hope for the future. Is I think people like what they see. It'll keep happening.
Great. Marcel, you had something to add? Or?
He kind of said it. I teach art classes still and workshops and things for mostly kids these days, but also for adults. And I just recently, a few months ago, taught one for a group of Girl Scouts. That's a thing now. They get a badge in making comic books. And this was at the Toonseum. So at one point, I'm watching the girls mill around. And mind you, I've done that for years. And when I first started doing this, I've always had girls in those classes, but this was all girls, and it was kind of fascinating. So at the time, the Toonseum had a superhero exhibit up, and I watched 2 girls walk over, and they're like 11, 12, and they're talking to each other, and the one is firing off a list of names of those characters like you wouldn't believe, just rattling them off, and then she stops and looks at herself, and she just kind of puts her head down and goes, why do I know all the names of these characters? And without missing a beat, her companion looked up at her and went, because you're epic. That's my hope for the future right there.
Okay, we just have a few minutes left. If anyone has any questions, you can. There's a mic right there.
Is it on?
Yeah.
No questions from you, sir.
Hi, guys. No, my question is, it feels so weird being here. My question is, being part of this community, if you could talk, has there been a tangible effect on your work as creators that you might not have had working in a vacuum, but being part of this and being part of this crowd, this community, has affected you in ways that, like I said, perhaps wouldn't have if you were working on your own?
Being judged by our peers. No, so, I mean, seriously, having that community of people who look at your work and talk about your work, you talk about the process, you talk about writing, you talk about art, you know, we look at each other's stuff and make suggestions or whatever. I know working with you on Chaos Punks got me back to the page, and
Right.
I felt I learned something from it, and you and I have talked. Me inking your work, I know you felt like your work grew.
I think, and that's what you get from the group too, is encouragement
Yes.
and expectations. Because, like Wayne and I, we worked on a page a week. That was our system.
Yeah.
And I would show up at the comic store every Wednesday, and so for me, I was like, I have to hand him a penciled
Yeah.
page, or I can't go in there.
And I had to have last week's inked.
And he had to have the ink page to give back to me, or he wouldn't show up for work that day.
It's a vicious cycle.
So,
You also make lifelong friends.
Don't touch me.
Anyone else have any?
I was just curious for everyone, in your work in making comics and stuff, how much of your background is like any sort of formal education in like fine arts or illustration, or how much of it is just experience and being in the community?
I'll go first. I went to the Art Institute, and I actually went for visual communications, so it was more of a career for, you know, just doing, you know, like working in business, you know, that kind of thing, like for businesses. There were illustration classes, but I think for me, after I got out of school and I didn't find a job right away, I found that comics was a good way for me to continue to be creative, and that's where I started. So.
I studied graphic design. I have a BFA in graphic design and painting, and graphic design I always say is a great field to study for comics because it's the only other art form that combines, you know, words and images. So I was very happy with that and the application of that. But the actual making comics, like a lot of it's probably based on community, and if not direct community, just like going up to people and asking them questions about how they do it, you know, and like at events like these shows, I'd run up to the artists and ask them things that I just look back and am horrified that I would do that. But you know, that it is how you learn. It is a way that I learned a lot of what I know about making comics.
I think of myself more as a writer than an artist these days. I do art, but compared to these guys, not so much. I have never had an art class since high school, or a writing class for that matter. So a lot of it's self-taught. I have a master's in clinical psychology, which I'm not using. Well, I probably am in the store every day. But yeah, and I think there are so many resources to learn outside of the traditional educational model.
Like Scott, I went to the Art Institute. I went there knowing I wanted to make comics, like literally when I was 5 years old. Like, that was it, boom. And apparently when I went there, I missed a window where they had comics classes available just prior to when I got there and stopped, and then I went there for 2 years straight and left, and they reinstituted it. But ultimately it didn't matter because I knew I was still applying everything I was learning to comics. If anything, maybe it made it better because it gave me it opened up the breadth of what I was learning and applying to comics. And I needed years of application to really let that filter into my sensibilities and really take root, if that makes sense, hopefully. But and then you just do the work. You know, you just make pages and pages and pages. You don't go to school, meet people, learn as much as you can from as many sources as you can, but ultimately you got to do the work. That's how you learn.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
What's the toughest part of the comic making process?
Convincing yourself to show up and do the work.
Yeah,
What?
it's very time intensive. You kind of have to believe in this idea before you have, hundreds of hours of work ahead of you, and you just kind of have to have faith that it's going to work out more or less how you plan, or maybe better if you're lucky. But that can be daunting. You start at the beginning and it's like, is that idea strong enough that I'm going to want to look at it for the next 600 hours of my working life? Sometimes you get a couple hundred hours in and you realize, I think I'm done with this one.
Loneliness is like one of the, it can be rough in this occupation, because you're spending a lot of time. It's you and the drawing table, and there you go. And if you share a studio space with somebody, I think that can assuage a lot of it. Wayne and I have space that we share from time to time when we both have projects. And this is nice too, because I can actually praise this person publicly with him right here. So I was working on a project a couple years ago, and it was extended. It was like one of the first times it was me. It was like me and this drawing table, day after day after day. And I started going a little stir crazy, and I had questions about stuff. So I called Jim, and he very graciously, he called me back one day, and we had a very nice talk about stuff, and it went beyond even what I was hoping for, and it meant a lot. It actually just left me feeling a lot better about my choices. So the hardest part, doing it by yourself. Nice thing, in Pittsburgh, we got this fantastic community, so you don't have to do it all by yourself.
Scott, quick answer, then we got to wrap it up. Sorry.
Ditto? No.
Thank you.
No, I think it is the knowing how much work you have ahead of you is probably the hardest part, and you have to commit to it, even if it's a nice day and you want to go somewhere, but you have to get that page done. I think so. You can appreciate Pittsburgh weather when it rains, because then you're like, good, I can stay home and draw and not feel bad about it. So.
All right. Well, hey guys, I want to thank you for coming out. I want to thank the Wizard World staff, especially Donna Chen. Thanks to DJ Kaufman for being an advocate for us local Pittsburgh guys to have a presence here at Wizard World. I want to thank my panelists, Marcel, Wayne, Jim, Scott, and I encourage you to check out all their stuff downstairs. And of course, I want to thank my co-hosts, Scott, Jared, and Sean. I wouldn't be doing this without you guys. So thank you very much. You guys have a good rest of the show.